Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Olivia, and today we're going to be reviewing every single book that I read in 2023. We might be here a little while. I'm going to try to get through these books as quickly as I can, kind of like reviewing a book in a sentence or less. But it might be a few, just depends on the book. Really quick, before I dive into these books, I just wanted to say that it's never about the number of books you read. It should always be about your reading experience and how much fun you're having or what you take away from your books. I'm going to be talking about, I think, 47 books today, and that's something that I'm really happy with. It was a great amount of books for me to read this year, but everyone has a different number that is going to bring them joy. So yeah, I feel like that's really important. But without further ado, let's talk about the books because that's why we're all here. The first book that I read in 2023 was The Three-Body Problem by Liu Cixin. This book is an epic sci-fi world. If you like aliens, if you like video games, if you like the idea of an attack on science and scientists and mathematicians and engineers randomly dying, I think this could be the book for you. It's the first in a trilogy. I really enjoyed it. The writing was amazing, and Barack Obama recommends this book. So the next book that I read in 2023 was The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abi Dare. This is a fictional cultural story, I would say, about a girl growing up in a village in Nigeria who is ultimately on a journey to become educated. This book does have a lot of very difficult scenes. For that reason, it resonated with me very deeply, but at the same time, I had to take some breaks because, again, it was just hard to get through. I thought it was so beautiful, and I think it's something that everybody should read. Then I read Neon Gods by Katie Robert, and I wouldn't recommend this to my worst enemy. To say the least, I didn't enjoy this book. I love Greek retellings. This is a Hades Persephone retelling, and I was like, what could go wrong? I love that concept. Turns out this just wasn't for me. The themes in here, the type of romance that this was, just was not my cup of tea. I gave it 1 star. Maybe you'd like it. I'm not sure. Wasn't my kind of book. Okay, the next book that I read, so fun, such a magical little book, and that would be The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. I had seen the films but never read the books, and on a walk one day, I stumbled across this book in a little free library, and I picked it up, read it in like 2 days. It's like, I think it's for kids, and it's adorable. I loved it. Did not mind at all the fact that this was definitely written for a younger age group. I loved it. You should read it. The next book that I read in 2023 actually ended up being one of my top 2 books of the entire year. So that's saying something, I guess. And that book is Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren. This is a second chance romance book that has cabin vibes, all these different references to reading and literature. Again, it's second chance and it follows these kids falling in love. And then in the present timeline, Macy and Elliot are falling in love again. And I absolutely ate it up. I will be rereading it in 2024. So if you're looking for a fun romance to read around this time of year, highly, highly, highly recommend. Then coming in at number 6, I read Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. This was my first Murakami book, and I was actually really pumped to read this because I'd never read anything by this author before, and everybody talks about his work. Norwegian Wood is the story of 2 friends coming together because of a loss of their close mutual friend, if that makes sense. And it was really sad, but also really beautiful. And I feel like if you go into this book with that like critical reader perspective, you really would enjoy this book. I honestly really liked it, and I understand why everybody heralds Murakami's work as like amazing and beautiful literature. If you go into it with this critical analysis perspective, I think you will have an amazing time with it. Now we're back to a little bit more of a disappointing read. And the next book that I read was Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating by Christina Lauren. This was, frustrating, disappointing, all of the not great things because I love Christina Lauren. Love in Other Words by them, and then also my favorite Half Night Stand by Christina Lauren are 2 of my all-time favorite books. So to go from reading those 2 to reading this book, and not liking it was really frustrating. I didn't like the tropes. There was a lot of miscommunication in there. It wasn't for me. People do like this book though, so maybe you'll like it. I just personally didn't enjoy my experience reading it pretty much at all. The next book was an absolute breath of fresh air. I read I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy, and I watched iCarly growing up. I was obviously curious when I heard that this memoir was coming out, and it follows Jennette and her journey with like a toxic relationship with a parent, the blurred moral lines that come with child acting, eating disorders, so many realistic things that people face. And I felt like she did a really, really great job sharing with her fans and her readers, and even people who had no idea who she was, just these really powerful messages and questions. And I personally absolutely adored this memoir. We're sticking with memoirs. That memoir was so good that I had to go and find another one to read. And I read My Life with Chimpanzees by Jane Goodall. I am an anthro girly. I have another channel here on YouTube where I talk about all things humans and anthropology and primatology. So I had to go and read Jane Goodall's memoir, and it was fantastic. I mean, this woman is a badass. There's no other way to say it. She is an absolute badass. The things that she described in this memoir, her connection to the chimpanzees, living in nature, her journey getting to Africa, everything that she learned, oh my goodness, cannot put into words how good it was. But my absolute favorite thing about it was the ending was so inspiring. Like, there is really this amazing call to action, and I just felt so inspired, and like I needed to go out and make an impact on the world right now. Next, I read Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt, and this is one of my new favorite books ever. This follows a group of different characters. It follows a woman named Tova who recently lost her husband, and her son also mysteriously vanished years prior. And it also follows an aquarium octopus named Marcellus. And literally, the octopus has a POV in this book. It's so good. And it was so beautiful. The writing was gorgeous. And again, the ending was just so powerful. And I loved how everything just came together. Okay, book number 11. We're getting there, guys. The next book that I read was The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This, I will tell anyone, a great place to start with classic literature. I feel like a lot of people could go into this not really having that like English background and still take a lot away from it. It's about this, I don't even know how else to describe it, like beautiful man, like gorgeous human being named Dorian Gray, who at the start of the story is getting his portrait painted. And he makes a wish at the beginning of the book that the portrait could grow old and he could stay young forever. So kind of like a reversal, you know, whereas a portrait would normally stay youthful, right? And let's just say there is some magical realism in here, and the plot just kind of goes from that little wish that he makes. Guys, I don't think of classics as having a lot of plot twists. There are some plot twists in here. And the ending, why are all these books that I'm talking about right now having really crazy endings? This one, this is like the OG crazy ending, okay? Very good. I liked this one a lot. And it's a great place to start if you're thinking about getting into some classic literature. The next book that I read was The Dark Forest, which is that second book in the 3 Body Problem trilogy. Again, if you like video games, the idea of an attack on science, aliens, extraterrestrial, and like space battles, like anything like that, with again, beautiful writing and some of the best world building I've ever seen, I would recommend this series. The next book that I read was Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. And this book is about a magical coffee shop that allows you to go back in time, but you can only go back in time for the amount of time it takes your coffee to get cold. I thought this concept was really, really cool, but unfortunately, I thought the execution wasn't great. Like, I thought there was a lack of exploration of certain deeper ideas. And I felt like there was a lot of repetition, redundancy, just a little bit boring, and personally wasn't my cup of tea. Then I read November 9th by Colleen Hoover, and I really enjoyed this book, although I will say I don't really think about it ever since I read it. It follows Ben and Fallon. It's a romance book, and every single year on November 9th, they meet up. And the book is only written, I think, on that one day, so on November 9th each year, and kind of details that day. And in classic Colleen Hoover style, the ending is wild, things go crazy. And I really enjoyed it while reading it. I thought it was really good, but again, I don't really think about it that often now that I've finished it. Okay, this book, guys, was a major surprise. I read Archer's Voice by Mia Sheridan, went to go visit my sister, had just finished November 9th and didn't have something else to read. So randomly I pulled Archer's Voice off her shelf and I was like, oh, I'll give this a shot. I know nothing about it. So good. Why is it that sometimes when you pick a random book that you know nothing about, those are the best books ever? This is a romance book, and both of the main characters in this story have been through some really difficult things, and they connect. I don't want to spoil anything. I feel like the less you guys know, the better, but they connect in a really unique way. I definitely still think about this book all the time. And it's also small town. So if you like small town romance, this could be the book for you. The next book that I read was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I talked about this in my 5-star books of 2023 video. This book has so many amazing things in it. It's got Hollywood, scandal, friendships, romance, family, all these amazing ideas, and it's just such a great example of deep fiction and amazing character development. And oh my gosh, so good, so good. Go read it. Honestly, go read anything by this author. I loved it. Then I began my ACOTAR journey, guys. So the next book that I read was A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. This book series takes place in a world where there are fae and there are humans, and these two creatures, people, beings are divided by a wall. And the fae and the humans each have this set of rules that they're supposed to live by. But at the very beginning of our book, Feyre, the main girl, accidentally breaks one of these rules that they're supposed to live by and gets kidnapped to the Fae realm and is supposed to live out the rest of her days there. And then that's when things start to get crazy. So I liked this book. I felt like it was definitely a lead into the rest of the series, which I did enjoy more than the first book. But if you're into fantasy, if you're into romance, if you're looking to get into fantasy or romance, I would recommend this series 10 times over. Then we have my heart and soul favorite book potentially ever. I read Happy Place by Emily Henry. This is a second chance romance. The first timeline is when Harriet and Wynne, our two main characters, are falling in love in college. And then we get to see them 10 years later, and they have broken off an engagement. But they go on an annual trip with their friends, and their friends don't know that they broke off the engagement. So to kind of preserve some hurt feelings, they fake date on this trip. And it was so good, so realistic. I personally related to Harriet so much, and I feel like a lot of people do. Go read it, please. It really was my favorite book of 2023 and is potentially one of my favorite books of all time. Then I read The Selection by Kiera Cass. This was a reread for me. I have read the Selection series already, but I found it at a thrift store and I was like, I have to read this. It's basically like a dystopian version of The Bachelor, where in this world, when the prince is ready to get married, 25 or 30 girls from across the castes in this kingdom are selected, sent to the castle, and essentially just all date the prince until he knows who he wants to marry. That there's rebels and stuff and all these other things. And our main girl, America, is selected but doesn't want to be there. Next up, I read Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari, and this is a nonfiction book about humans, but more specifically looking at humans in the future. So things that we face now, what are those going to look like in 10 years, 20 years? So thinking about human aging and AI and disease. And I really enjoyed this book. My personal fave by this author is Sapiens, but I still did really enjoy this one as well. Then I read A Court of Mist and Fury, which is the second book in the ACOTAR series. It's basically everything good about ACOTAR, the first book, with more romance, and I loved it. One of my favorite books in the series, 10 out of 10, would recommend. My camera just ran out of storage if things look a little different. But the next book that I read was A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. And this is a Holocaust memoir where our author not only recounts his experiences through the Holocaust, but also does psychoanalysis on man's ability to cope. I did fully cry throughout this whole memoir. It was just so heartbreaking, and I felt like it was the little things that I didn't expect to read about that really got the tears flowing. And personally, I do think that this is something that everybody should read. It's very short, and again, what I keep saying about this book is I don't know how someone comes out of that experience and produces something so beautiful. Then I read The Elite by Kiera Cass. This is the second book in the Selection series, and I would say that it's just like the first book, but our main girl, America, is more annoying. Then I read The Housemaid by Frida McFadden, and this is a thriller. I don't read a ton of thrillers, as you can probably tell by this video. And our main girl is a little like, are the lights on kind of thing, because she agrees to work in this house and live in this house where the lock on her door is on the outside. Do I need to say more? With that said, though, I really did like this thriller and would definitely recommend it to pretty much anyone. Then I read Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and this book is the story of a band coming together, but it's being written in an interview style, and each of the bandmates is kind of reflecting on their experiences joining this band and being a part of this band called Daisy Jones and the Six. And it's interesting because each of the bandmates kind of remembers things a little bit differently, and I listened to this one on audio and it was so good. 5 stars. Go read it. It was awesome. Then I read Trust by Hernan Diaz, and this book takes place at the end of the 1920s and during the 1930s, and follows this couple and kind of calls into question exactly where their money came from. And the thing about this book that's really unique is it's not actually one book all the way through. It's actually like 4 stories, if that makes sense. And they're each like either different characters' perspectives or like different versions of the same story, but obviously they're all so different from each other, and it calls into question this really interesting idea of like, who can you trust? Hence the title. I'm trying to get through these, guys. I don't want to take up your whole day. The next book that I read is A Court of Wings and Ruin, 3rd book in the ACOTAR series, 6 stars. It was my favorite, and I would just say that there's more war and politics in this one. Sticking with the Sarah J. Maas train, the next book that I read was A Court of Frost and Starlight, which is the novella in that same series. And I liked this one because no one was fighting for their life. All the characters that we know and love are just kind of living their happy little lives, and it sets up for the next book. And I don't know, it wasn't anything crazy exciting, but like, it's kind of nice to just see the characters that you love be happy, you know? The next book that I read was Verity by Colleen Hoover, and this again is a kind of a wild ride thriller. And I don't know if it's because I read The Housemaid recently before it, or if other people draw this comparison, but I actually found them to be very similar to each other for a different series of reasons. Like, honestly, if I were to do it again, I would love to read these 2 books with a book club and like kind of compare and contrast them. Verity follows the story of this woman who she's an author, and she's agreeing to finish writing the books of another author who was in an accident. And it's really good. The ending is wild, but I will say I did not enjoy the extended epilogue. Book number 30. This is crazy. I actually did a video where I read Colleen Hoover books for a week, hence my next book being It Ends With Us. And this is probably tied for my favorite Colleen Hoover book with Confess. This is a story about relationship abuse, and it's not quite romance. You know, we have a girl who she meets someone and they start a relationship, but things aren't quite right. And you can kind of see as the reader what Lily, our main girl, is coming to realize during her relationship. And there's also this really fun, in my opinion, fun timeline about her and her like high school love named Atlas. And I'll just say it here. I love Atlas. Atlas is the blueprint. I love this man. Yeah. Next up, I read The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. And I would describe this one as a cozy fantasy. It follows this man who works for the Department of Magical Youth. His name is Linus Baker, and he is sent on this mission to kind of check up on these really dangerous magical children. But we learn really early that these children are just kids, and they're not so scary. They just have some scary powers. And again, it's really cute, really cozy, not super high stakes. And I would say that the highlight of this book for me was the character development from beginning to end. Now we have Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score. This was my first Lucy Score book. I did enter the world of Knock 'Em Out. It's small town enemies to lovers, and there is a kid in this book who I actually thought was written really well. I don't always feel that way about kids in books. And I think the highlight to me about this book, you guys will see Lucy Score books are always like giant. And I think it's because she gives a lot of attention to not only the main romance, but also all the side characters and how they like facilitate the story. So everything felt very real and fun and exciting. And like you not only have a relationship with our like main characters, but also all the side characters, which is really unique in my opinion. Then I did finish the ACOTAR series. I read A Court of Silver Flames, which has a different main character. I won't say who. And it's definitely the steamiest book in the series. It was a slow start, but I did end up really enjoying it. Then we have The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This was my first Jennifer Lynn Barnes, and I'm definitely going to be reading more of her work. This follows a girl named Avery who randomly inherits billions of dollars from a man she does not know, and the only way that she can get his money is by living in his house for a year. But the catch is his entire family lives in this house, and they're a little bit salty that they didn't get the money, if you are catching what I'm saying. And there's a lot of like mysteries and riddles, and it's really fun. I definitely want to read the rest of this series in 2024. I will say it felt a little bit youthful, like a little more youthful than I would have preferred, but like that's all good. You know, I'm not going to complain too much about that. Then I did dive right back into fantasy and read The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is the first book in, I think it's a trilogy in that trilogy. And it follows Bilbo Baggins, who is this cute little hobbit who ends up on this like wild, crazy adventure where he needs to protect this magical ring. And the highlight for me was definitely the characters. And I would also say that this is a great place to get started with classic literature. If maybe you like fantasy and you want to try classics, this would be great. It was not too difficult to understand. The middle was a little bit slow, but overall, I just thought it was adorable. Also, Gandalf is fully my king. Like, I love this man. Then I read Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. This was my first book by Stephanie Garber, and it follows a girl named Evangeline who makes a deal with a fate in order to remedy her broken heart. Long story short, you're not supposed to make deals with fates. Nothing good will come of it, and it sends her on this crazy, wild adventure. It's very magical, full of, as I love to say, little mini dragons sitting on mushrooms. It's cute, it's adorable. Wasn't my favorite fantasy that I've ever read, but I definitely liked it. Then for my Halloween book club that I do with my best friend, I read The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. This book came out of left field. This was another Archer's Voice situation. Did not expect literally anything from it. Didn't know what it was about. Literally didn't know a thing. And it was one of my favorite books of the year. This is a romance book, but again, it has this Emily Henry vibe where there's a lot of fiction elements and there's also like a magical realism element where our main girl is like a romance ghostwriter, but she's lost her belief in romance. She's like, oh, it's all fake. I have nothing to write about now. Love like this isn't real. But the magical realism part is she can like occasionally see ghosts. And she goes on a trip home, and when she's home, she sees her publisher there, but he's a ghost. And I'm just gonna say I didn't think I would love like a ghost romance like this. Oh, but I did. Then I read Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. My current goal is to read the entire Throne of Glass series in 2024. Don't know if I'll be able to do it, but I am going to try my darndest to complete this series. This is about a world-famous assassin who gets entered in these trials to become the king's assassin. And they're like low-key, so no one's really supposed to know about them. And Selena is a really powerful main character. I absolutely loved her, and I really love the side characters and the world that this first book is building out. Then I read the second book in the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy called, The Ballad of Never After, and I liked this one more than the first book. I would say that the characters are a little bit more fleshed out and there's a bit more romance, which I do prefer. Like, I like that for sure. So yeah, it was good. I think I gave it like 4 stars. Next up, we have A Flicker in the Dark by Stacy Willingham. This is a creepy as heck thriller. Okay, you guys, it basically follows this girl who, when she was young in her small town, there was like this string of like disappearances of young girls. She was like a young girl, so her parents were like, stay home, we'll protect you, like don't go out at night alone. And then it turns out that her dad is like the serial killer, okay? And then the actual book takes place like, I don't know, later. She's like an adult and has a job and stuff, and the same thing starts happening again. So creepy. Oh my God, so creepy. I did really like it though. The sun is coming out right now. Can you see that? This is gonna be fun to edit. Okay, we're on number 42. So we are making our way through this video, thank goodness. And the next book that I read was The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. Did I know that this was like super popular and crazy a few years ago? Yes. Is that the reason I didn't read it at the time? Also yes. But for anyone who doesn't know, big STEM biology girly. Like, my major in college was anthropology with an emphasis in biology, and then my minor was evolutionary medicine. Big STEM girly, okay? And reading about like a STEM romance was something I did not know that I needed in my life. Plus, I thought Ali Hazelwood's writing was actually so good and like hilarious. Absolutely ate this book up and was exactly like the break that I needed from fantasy, because I was kind of on a bit of a fantasy binge leading up to this book and low-key afterwards too. Then I tried to read The Hating Game. This was actually my DNF of the year. I read, I think, like 75 pages of The Hating Game. I didn't like it. In fact, I really strongly didn't like it. The enemies to lovers thing that was going on, I just felt like it was lacking depth, and like they hated each other just to hate each other, and like, I don't know, I just found the characters really annoying. And literally I wasn't going to force myself to sit through a few hundred more pages of that. Like, I just really didn't like it. Maybe it gets better and I just didn't have enough patience, but for me, enemies to lovers has to be done a certain way, and that wasn't the way. But then we go from a DNF to a fantastic, amazing, lovely book, and that was Fourth Wing. I did finally read this by Rebecca Yarros. So good, guys. Okay, I will say I was expecting to like love the romance, and I liked the romance. I loved the dragons in here, okay? Picture this. You go to school your whole life to become a scribe, and then you find out that you have to go become a dragon rider, and only like, I don't know, 50%, 25%, some low percent of people survive. Speaking as someone who I think would be a scribe girly, being put in this position to then go ride a dragon, I think I'd lose my, I don't think I would be doing well. And I don't know, I really loved this book. It kept my attention the whole way through and is exactly what I love in a fantasy. So I'm looking forward to reading Iron Flame next year. Next up, I read Educated by Tara Westover. I actually listened to this memoir on audio, checked it out from my library, and absolutely ate it up. This was so good. You guys can tell I read 4 memoirs this year. I think is the final number now. And this is about a girl growing up in like a very small, isolated town, I think in Utah. And she basically doesn't have much of an education growing up. And she's doing a lot of like manual labor for her family. And kind of, again, she's on this journey to become educated. And it's just her story. I loved it, and it was just such a different like worldview on life, and I was just so like amazed and in awe of all of the things that Tara Westover was able to accomplish. It really is just amazing perspective, and I would really recommend it. You guys are going to be so proud of me. The next book that I read was Anxious People by Friedrich Bachmann. I put this on my December TBR, and I finally did it. For anyone new, this was a book that I put on my TBR every month for months and just didn't read it. But I did it, guys. I did it. And I think the best way to describe this book is quirky. It's a little bit silly. We follow a bank robber who accidentally takes a bunch of people hostage in an apartment. And like, I don't know. The only way that I can describe this book is all of the characters were really annoying, but then I loved them, like by the end. Shoot, and now my camera battery's gonna die. This video was so chaotic. Then the next book that I read was It Starts With Us by Colleen Hoover. This book was the second book to It Ends With Us. This is Lily and Atlas's story. So basically picking up the pieces after coming out of a traumatic relationship and like relationship abuse situation. And I liked it. Again, it was enjoyable. Nothing like super crazy, like not like a standout read, but as a fan of like Lily and Atlas, it was really, really nice to get their story. And then finally, oh my gosh, maybe I can do it. Finally, I am currently reading number 48, guys. I'm currently reading An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. I really like it. Today's the 18th, so I do have some more time to finish that book and maybe even read another book or two by the end of the year during the holidays. So my camera's literally going to die any second now. I love you all so much. Thank you so much if you made it all the way to the end. I literally can't believe we just talked about 48 books. Like, that's crazy. But I love you all so much. Thank you for being here. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Okay, bye.